I'm the Octagon, and in the early 1920s, Australian soldiers returned back home after serving in World War I, and the government had to find a way to take care of them. Now, they could have just given them a pension and allowed them to retire peacefully for risking their lives, but the government instead decided that backbreaking manual labor was a much better alternative. So the government gave 5,000 veterans some farmland in Western Australia so they could continue being functioning members of society. And this land, by the way, was almost entirely stolen from the native Aborigines. But there were also two major problems. A lot of the soldiers had trouble going from fighting foes to using hoes overnight. And secondly, Western Australia is more drier than a bottle of Nycil, making the quality of soil absolutely terrible for farming anyway. But it somehow worked, and the farmers even managed to grow wheat. And while their lives were boring and tiring, but that's not too depressing. Fast forward 10 years later, and life for our farmers is now greatly depressing. The prices of wheat just kept falling further every day, but the government said, "Hey, don't worry about it, mate. It'll be fine. We'll even give you subsidies if you just keep growing more wheat." Who would have guessed a global market crash could have led to more economic downturn? I mean, who would have ever predicted something like that? That's just ridiculous, you know what I'm saying? Without their promised subsidies, the farmers became more depressed and unhappy. But you know who was happy at this time? This one bird called the emu. Australia's national bird, the emus travel in herds and migrate to the coast in search of water after their mating season. Only this time, 20,000 of them also found some poor struggling farmers with a lot of wheat in their way. Now, emus are about 6 feet tall on average, weigh 70 kilograms, and can run at speeds of up to 50 kilometers an hour. In addition, these birds are seriously tough. Like, they'll catch a grenade, throw their hand on a blade, jump in front of a train, and it'll still take a bullet to the brain for them to die. Naturally, these flimsy, fragile, frail fences were no match for mobs of emus who would just destroy them and eat all the wheat they could. And the farmers did try their best to get rid of the emus themselves, but they were just overwhelmed and had no choice but to ask the government for help. So a deputation of farmers went to meet the Minister of Defense, George Pearce, and said, "Hey man, we're gonna starve to death because of birds." Yeah, and wheat is a major Australian export, so it'll be good for the economy too. Alright, if you don't do something about it, we're gonna vote in favor of an upcoming secession referendum next year and vote to leave Australia. That's not gonna be good for your political career, by the way. Alright, stop ostracizing the ostriches. I'll get the military to do something about these emus of yours. The government and the farmers then signed a deal where the men, weapons, and transportation will be financed by the government, while the farmers would have to arrange for the food and accommodation of the personnel as well as payment for the ammunition to be used. The command of the operation was given to Major Gwyneth Parwez Whitney Aubrey Meredith, along with 2 more soldiers, each armed with the Lewis machine gun. The 3 were collectively given 10,000 rounds of ammunition to kill 20,000 emus. That's 1 bullet for 2 emus. So unless the 2 people you're working with here are named Deadshot and Rango, it's gonna be fairly difficult to pull this one off. And while unfortunately the 2 were named S. Mukmare and J.O. Halloran, Pearce was so confident in the entire operation's success that he even hired a cinematographer to document the entire thing. And with everything in place, the war on emus had officially begun. The first attack took place on the 2nd of November 1932 at Campion, where about 50 birds were spotted. Some farmers tried to herd the emus within range of the weapons, but as soon as the first shot was fired, the emus split up into smaller groups and just ran randomly in every direction away from the gun's range. So the men couldn't just spray and pray hoping that they'll get some birds in the way, but focusing on one group would give the others enough time to run away as well. And on their very first day, they only managed to kill a number of birds. So a pretty bad start overall, but the next attack was just 2 days later on the 4th of November, where this time 1,000 emus were spotted. The men patiently waited to ambush the emus at point blank range. By all means and possibilities, it should have been a pretty easy win, but that day the emu gods saw everything and decided to pull a Bradbury artillery on their birds below. And just a few seconds after the men had started firing, the guns suddenly jammed out of nowhere. And by the time they managed to clear it up, most of the emus had ran away, and they only managed to kill 12 birds out of the 1,000. After being defeated by both luck and skill, the group decided to move south where the emus were said to be more tamer, as if that was gonna make any difference. But to make it easier this time, they mounted one of the machine guns on top of a truck. But they forgot one important thing. You see, there's a good reason why even something as desolate as Mad Max needs to have roads in it. Because the entire ride was so bumpy that not only did the emus manage to outrun the truck, but they couldn't even aim properly and not a single shot was fired that day. By the 8th of November, the group had used a quarter of their ammunition and only about 300 emus had been killed. Following the negative media coverage of the events, and Pierce, fearing that the men would try some more big brain tactics and embarrass him further, decided to call the operation off, and the emus won 3-0. And the birds still continued their rampage on the farmers, so they had no choice but to ask the government for help again. Hey man, we're still gonna starve to death because of those birds. Alright, stop criticizing the kangaroos. I'll get the military to do something about these emus for real this time. And by military, I mean the same 3 people as before. So Meredith and company were back in action on the 13th of November, but this time, they knew all about the emu's tricks and had much better success. And by December, the group were gunning down 100 emus a week. You might think that's good enough, but even at this rate, it would have still taken them about 4 years to complete their objective. So on the 10th of December, the operation was finally put to an end, and Meredith reported that they had killed 986 emus using precisely 9,860 rounds at a rate of exactly 10 rounds per emu, which kind of makes me think that already accepted their failure and just decided to goof around anyway. Like, so we killed this emu with 11 bullets, but this one only took 8. Yeah, that'll look good on the statistics. And while 2,500 birds were reported to be wounded, the remaining 19,000 emus still continued their destruction. So the farmers asked the government for assistance again. But this time, the government had enough and said, after everything we've done so far, like wasting your money on our operation, you still just have to complain, huh? So you know what? Fuck it, we're done. You ungrateful bogans can go take care of the emus yourself. Hey, wait a minute. Yeah, that could work. So the government just gave the farmers ammunition and paid them to kill the emus themselves. And the emus, who had so far outsmarted Bullet, could not outsmart the human nature to kill and destroy everything for one's own personal benefit. And within just 6 months in 1934, 57,000 bounties were collected. Now, quick question for you. After a reliable enough solution to the emu problem was found, what will the farmers do next? Yeah, that's right. They're gonna ask for assistance with the emus again. Not only in the same year when they killed 57,000 of them, but even as far as 1943 and 1948. But the government, not wanting Australia to be an international embarrassment again, just continued the bounty program as usual. But you know what actually ended the Emu War? One day, the farmers said, hey, what if I get rid of these dog water ancient fences and make something that actually keeps the emus out for once? So the farmers just started using chain link fences and nobody needed to kill emus anymore. So I guess if there's anything we can learn from this entire story, it's that if you're the government of a country and want to solve a problem, just pay the people and they'll solve it themselves, or just pay the people and there won't be any problem to solve in the first place. Or just build better fences and you can keep the immigrants out. But as for now, I'm the Octagon and I'm probably a history YouTuber. Are you sure this would work? Huh, where we're going, we don't need roads.